Happy holidays. Welcome to the Jazz Record Center. I'm opening for Fred this morning. I just work here on Saturdays. I wanted to talk today about reviewing hi-fi gear. I review hi-fi gear for Stereophile magazine. I've written about hi-fi for over 25 years, starting in 1995 at soundstage.com. Then I wrote for sixmoons.com for a while, Positive Feedback, and I wrote for John Darko at his great website before coming to Stereophile in 2015. I think that some people think we get this gear and it's just a big party and we're drinking and it's just fun and games and, you know, who do we think we are? We review this gear, we think we know so much. That's the impression I get sometimes, because people don't really understand what reviewing hi-fi gear actually entails, because it's really hard. I write for Stereophile, which is to me the top of the heap. We're the magazine of reference, magazine of record for hi-fi in the world. I don't think there's no magazine that is as rigorous as we are, that is as demanding as our editors are. I have a very tough editor. He's a very patient editor, but I've been out on my keister almost a couple times when my work wasn't up to snuff, because my work has to stand alongside Herb Reichert, Michael Fremer, John Atkinson, Jim Austin, the late Art Dudley. And that's a very high task, and I'm lucky to be in the magazine, and I'm constantly learning and trying to improve my game. But let me just diagram what happens when we get this gear. First of all, we have to pitch the gear. Sometimes you're pitching. Right now I'm reviewing the Fleetwood DeVille speakers. I pitched those 2 years ago. Sometimes it takes that long for things to come into shape, come into being. I have a unique situation that I live in a very tall building with no elevators, so I have to get all this often heavy gear all the way up my stairs. I'm not crying and moaning, poor pitiful me. It's great. I have a wonderful job. I love what I do. It's very hard, but it's satisfying. It's always very challenging. But anyway, I get these speakers in, right? I have to unbox them. Well, let's just talk about the speakers for starters. The first thing I have to do is read all the literature and read all the prior reviews, which there aren't any, for the Fleetwood DeVilles, because Jonathan Weiss for a long time didn't want reviews of his gear. But first I have to figure out what makes this thing work and how it works. Now with a pair of speakers, that's kind of easy. But with something like the Technics SUR 1000 that I reviewed a couple months ago, it's very hard. The technology in that amplifier is literally brand new. Some innovative technologies in that amplifier, including they digitize the phono signal. They take the back RMF from the speaker and convert that so the amplifier can read it correctly for each different pair of speakers. It was just full of, gallium nitride switching power supplies. It was just full of novel technology. Jim Austin, my editor, has a PhD in physics, so if I get the stuff wrong, he knows right away. But I think even that amplifier challenged some of his knowledge, because it's brand new from Technics, an ancient company with very deep reserves of knowledge and insight and experience, a legacy hi-fi company. So first I have to figure that out, and that was really hard, because you have to read white papers literally to try to understand this stuff. And then there's the added pressure of getting all your questions to the manufacturer through the publicist or the distributor and trying to get them back on time so you can put that first half of the review away, at least for a time, after you've written how the thing works. And as with any story, you have to find a interesting opening for the story, so it's just not bland and dry. I try not to open with, this amplifier weighs such and costs such and such power ratings at such impedance. You want to be, that's the great thing about Herb Reichert. He's a wonderful storyteller. Art Dudley as well. These men, they could write about anything really, and they engage you. So that's a high bar I have to meet. After you feel comfortable with the technical description, then you have to set the gear up. And particularly with a pair of speakers, that can be very challenging. I did have my speakers on the short wall in my room, meaning if the room is long, one wall, two walls, if the room is long, I had my speakers on the long wall, which means I'm sitting across from them. That means if I'm sitting close to the back wall, I'm getting bass reflection behind me, which I'm hearing. And so I moved the speakers to the short wall and sat back. So I got, with these speakers, a little better depth, more soundstage. With nothing behind my head, you're hearing the true sound or closer to the true sound of the speakers. If there's a wall behind your head, it's reflecting, and you're hearing that reflected sound, and my sound was sort of congested with the speakers both on the long wall. But it took me a while to figure that out, and even then I had to move the speakers around a lot to find the best sound. Every room is different. When you're playing hi-fi or judging hi-fi, you're also judging it within your room. You're playing your room as much as you're playing your audio components, and I'm still in the process of moving those speakers around and trying to find the right spot for them. Then you have to decide which cables you want to use with these speakers, and that may change upstream what you're using as well. Certain amplifiers work better with some speakers than other speakers. I own my Shindo amplification. I own my reference system, my Kuzma turntable, my Thorns turntable, my DeVore Fidelity 096 speakers, my Shindo amplification. It's about a $50,000 system. But I also have loaner gear. I have about 5 integrated amps, and all these amps have to be used. They're not just sitting on my wall for me to party with. They have to be used in reviews, or the manufacturer will ask for them back. I have 3 or 4 pairs of bookshelf speakers. I have 5 integrated amplifiers. I have a wonderful Sugden preamp that I just received. But these all have to be used, and the sound judged with each component that I review, because each component will react differently with a new component. The way we review is we have our reference gear, which we know intimately, and whenever you introduce something new into the reference system, you hear how it sounds automatically, generally speaking. But even then, it can be really hard to judge what a piece of gear is doing. Is it transparent? How is the low end? How is the top end? Is the top end crisp? Is it aggressive? Is it forward? Also, you might get into what kind of tweeter is in the speaker, or is it a multiple array of speakers, which means a complex crossover. There are all these things you have to take into consideration. And at the end of the day, the goal of every review is to tell the reader how the thing sounds. And you get that by using it with multiple. I have 2 turntables. I have a streaming system. I have a turntable. I have a CD player. I have a integrated amps. I have a Heed. I have a Parasound. I have an Air. I have a Shit. And they all sound totally different. And I've been doing it so long, I can sort of judge, I sort of know how each amp is going to sound with each new pair of speakers to some degree. But sometimes I'm totally surprised. I have to judge sound staging, imaging, depth of sound stage, transparency, clearancy, coherency, dynamics, frequency range. And all this has to be addressed in 3,000 words, and it has to be understandable to the ordinary reader. So it's always like climbing a little mountain to do a good job with this. And then you have to have a conclusion after you've addressed all these different parameters, judging the review component with all your review components. Then you have to come up with a conclusion, which should include everything you've already said, perhaps with some other insight, and how this compares perhaps to the gear and the Stereophile recommended components. Is it a high value piece of gear, like something from Shit? This stuff is very high value. It's well made. It produces really strong sound up and down the line they have, and it's really well priced. Maybe the best priced hi-fi gear you can buy at the moment with cost to value. So then you turn it into your editor. And your editor usually has a lot of questions. Sometimes you're not clear in what you're saying, and the editor wants to get it across that you have to be clear. Maybe you want to rewrite this. Did you mean that? Is that what you meant to say? Then, in our case, John Atkinson takes the review piece for measurements, which we don't see until they're published in the magazine. And after all of that, the manufacturer gets to read it for proof checking. The manufacturer has no say-so over our opinion of the gear, but if there are factual errors, such as if we're telling the history of the company, which I did with Fine Audio in the last Fine audio piece I wrote, they have to proofread it. And another thing, when you're asking questions at the beginning of the process, very often manufacturers don't want to tell you anything about the gear, or they'll tell you as little as possible, such as, is it made in China? Because an equipment may say assembled in the UK. Well, but all the pieces might be made in China. That's just the nature of today's marketplace. And even before I go to the manufacturer in the beginning of the process, I see what's on the website. I reviewed a CD player recently from a legacy UK company, and there was almost nothing on the website. Before that, I reviewed a pair of speakers, and it was a case where the website was just full of like PR bullshit. It was written by a publicist. So you have to filter through all this information, try to get the accurate information. Some people will give you all the information you need right away and they're easy to work with. Other manufacturers, they don't want to tell you anything. It makes your job really hard. You can only review what they will tell you. So that's another difficulty. And so you have to be a writer, you have to be engaging, you have to be a conversationalist. Luckily, I've interviewed people for many years, so I'm reasonably good at that. And then finally, you see it in the magazine and hope that it floats and hope you get paid. So it's a hard process, but for me, it's very rewarding because I'm a creative person. I studied advertising design in college. I wanted to be an illustrator. I really never did anything with that. Then I started playing drums. I played jazz for a long time. Not a long time, about 5 years when I came to New York. Really couldn't hang. But my job as a Stereophile reviewer is always extremely challenging. It's very rewarding. It's something I love to do. It's always new. Right now I'm reviewing these DeVille speakers. Next I'm reviewing a streaming device. After that I hope to review some Fern and Roby speakers, even though it's not confirmed. And the new integrated amp from LKV Research, the new Class D amp I use is larger Class D amp. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there because I don't think I've ever seen on YouTube someone discussing how gear is actually reviewed and the guidelines for doing so. And I'm sure I've left other things out. But there you have it. Hope you found this useful. Merry Christmas.